So our next talk is by Dr. Ramasami. As you again heard in the introduction earlier this morning, he was the former secretary to the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. And even before that, he was in our neighborhood at the Central Leather Research Institute, where he was the director. And today he's going to talk about the changing landscape of Indian science.
Thank you, Chair, and thank all of you. I thank Dr. Ravindran for giving me an opportunity to be here today and join the celebration of the 60th year of IMSC. Of course, both Balu and Rohini shared their excitement of doing their own work. And I'm such a state that I cheer the work of other people. And it so happened when I was a scientist in the Leather Institute, whenever I get into states of depression, which most of us do, my hiding ground used to be math science. So people like Balu, Bhaskar, and Simon, they were all companions. And I was very happy to see the video today, where many of you shared the happiness of work done here. I think so. This is a new year, and I thank the IMSC for giving an opportunity to be starting this year with this happy frame of mind. I think there are very few people who enjoy their work. And there are some here in this institution who have made their home of professional life and enjoy, and that's very nice to be here today and starting the 2023 on this occasion. And of course, when you are a scientist, you do your own work. When you are like me, you enjoy the work of other people, you celebrate them. And it's very nice that the video that you presented, that how math science has contributed to the landscape of the Indian science. And let me share with you today the changing landscape of science in India. I did not call it Indian science, science in India. And there's a specific difference in this Indian science versus science in India. And let me dedicate this to the tireless efforts of the founders of math science on its 60th birth anniversary. And to me, IMSC has remained a case of small is beautiful in the Indian science landscape. There's here 48 people, and that's not a big number. And that's the beauty of this organization. And I have managed very large systems. That's what you appreciate. When you're a part of a change, you don't observe the change. You have to outside the change to see the changes that take place. So I'm going to talk to you about the changes that take place being an outside the science community as somebody who observes it from this process. As one would really, I'm not a kind of guy who goes back to the Vigyan and Aryabhatta levels of systems because they're all fantastic. But I think it's preferable to start with something that we could observe and observe process. And if you look at this post-1900 time, 1920s used to be a fantastic period of Indian science. Truly, science in India, some of the very best contributions to this country happened during this period of time, during 1900 and 1947, before our independence, when the government had no contribution whatsoever to support Indian science. There was no enthusiastic. These are individuals who made a fantastic status, and we, however, enjoyed a highly developed status among the developing countries during that period of time. And there's many lead scientific contributions matching the very best of the world emerged from these Indian scientists. And of course, when the 1958 Scientific Policy Resolution was promulgated in this country, it was ahead of NSF in the United States. And it was a developing country, developed a very emerging country, developed Scientific Policy Resolution in 1958, of course, drafted 1 3/4 page by Homi Bhabha and Pandit Nehru, read out in the parliament. And that tells you, conveys a principle, articulation of a principle that India's independent nation will support Indian science. That's the expression of political will. On account of several limited investments and changes in the external environment, I would say between 1981 to 2001 was another period of, Rohini talked about dark matter, just a dark period in this process of time. Because we could not make the kinds of investments that are necessary during this period of time. While I would not languish on what did not happen, I'm going to present the new year with the positive statements, what have happened since 2003, which are in the positive directions. And I would say, since 2003, 2003 is a science and technology innovation policy promulgated by Vajpayee government. India started to regain some lost ground in volume space. And sometimes we have to be careful that we do not overlook what has not happened when things do happen. So we still remain a fringe player in the global landscape. We have begun well, the best is yet to come. So I will make that statement before I move on to the next prize. And if you look at this changing national space in terms of S&T space, prior to 1947, you would see Survey of India, IMD, ICMR, all that happened. Primarily because, for example, Survey of India used to call themselves organizations like GOI, Government of India. I think we need to look at people of India, no, not government of India. Research institutions were really developed. Survey of India, in fact, you realize the Guindy Engineering College used to be the survey map system. They chose the best location for themselves. This is 250 years ago. So, Survey of India really created a database for the British rulers to get what they can get from here. And that's the basic process that we have. But very few universities, extremely few universities at that point of time. 1947 to 71, remember the 1947 when India became independent, the life expectancy of an average child of Indian was under 25. Therefore, there was a real starvation in this process. At that time, we had BARC, DRDO, UGC, IC. IITs were generated during this period of time, and math science belonged to the same legacy. It turns out that Alladi Ramakrishnan centenary is 2023. He was a very clever guy who got his institute done at his 40th year or something. So there will be a centenary of 60th year of IMSC and centenary of Ramakrishnan. Alladi is the same year. And all that happened during this period of time. And we must remember, in formation of IMSC, there's a role played by C. Subramaniam. Well, I would say that Pandit Nehru had a romance with science. I think Subramaniam married science. Therefore, he was a very important creator in formation of math science itself. And during this 1987 to 96, and after this Green Revolution, the government of India realized that there needs to be a science ministry. So they decided to locate the Ministry of Science and Technology with the PL 480 go down. So even today DSC remains in this PL 480 go down, and to convey that the science has a contributed to society's process. So the Green Revolution was in some sense a change in the directions of the science investments in political processes. Primarily, we look at this today, we're not going to the details of those. Today, we have 42,000 colleges, 993 universities. We have 9 science departments, not 580, 680 national institutions. And when I went to the Department of Science and Technology, the number of full-time equivalent scientists of this country per million population was 131. And it was probably slightly higher than the number of country to which we don't want to lose a cricket match. So this was a very small number. And the number of people publishing papers in Web of Science was in thousands. Today, we are looking at 330,000 full-time equivalent systems. Therefore, that's an expansion that is happening today in terms of scientific activity in this country, in terms of volume space. And in terms of intergenerational transitions in science, pre-47 is truly benefits to the rulers in terms of data and those kind of stuff. So establishing S&T infrastructure, this IIT, CSR labs, and scientific policy resolution. And then there is this funding agencies came in this crisis, Ministry of Science and Technology, Department of Science and Technology, and DPT, and so on. And they truly 1985 to 2002, where we had limitations, but it is the refurbishing and modernization of the infrastructure that happened during this period of time. And in 2003 to 2022, we have talked about aspirational changes in the growth of Indian science in terms of processes that happen, and all that big thing that Roni talked about in terms of participation in certain experiments and the LIC and so on, all that happened during this transitional phase of 2000 plus. So scaling up R&D investments, and today we are talking about aspiration to be top three in the world, and you're looking at aspirations of current generations, and they divide Indian generations into 5 types. A generation ahead of mine, the generation of freedom struggle. They really work for Indian freedom and kind of loyalty and sacrifice and so on. I consider myself as a generation of deprivation syndrome, wherein everything, when nothing was available, so even the only available thing was air, even water was not. Then there was this question of a comparison syndrome. Compare America, England, now China. There is the globalization of thrust. I consider the present people who are doing science in this country are aspirational generation aspirational process, and they are open to new challenges to organization. But then the institutions established, like mine in the Leather Research Institute in 1948, April 48, they have a legacy. Overcoming legacy is non-trivial. You must remember, in the Dravidian kingdom, whether Karigala Sodan allowed the movement to this place or not will happen. And these are realities, and one has to recognize these are challenges that we have to deal with. But whenever we talk about a nation, we must remember the changes should not be seen in shorter time space. You need to have a longer time space for changes to happen in a mural. It turns out, looking at the national education policy in 1966 was essentially a radical restructuring away from what was prevailed in the British model. Then there was the need for social integration in the national education policy of 1996. India is a country of immigrants over 2,000 years of history. That's all kinds of divides. And how do our energy spent on integrating itself is quite significant. Forget about the growth. Stability is more important than growth in this country. Then there's a question of standard harmonization, 1992. On 2020, you are learning optimization. Because it has to go through a process wherein basic needs are bridging the divides and then raising the standards. And these are the policy statements that happen. And you're looking at it in terms of I'm sorry, this particular thing has not happened, where there was a science policy based system not stored on this. Doesn't matter. It turned out that when I was called upon to be the Secretary of Department of Science and Technology, I gave myself 10 targets. What will I do if I went to the Department of Science? And what are the major changes that are necessary in this country? And first was democratization of Indian science, from a patronage to rights, citizens' rights. And they therefore bring performance-related in those processes. Therefore, one doesn't have to go through the peer review process the way that we operate. If it is you performed, you need to claim it as a matter of right. Then the debureaucratization of R&D systems, funding, it was an act of parliament, because in a democratic country, the government of India rules will apply as long as everything else, the financial provisions will apply everywhere. But if you want to create like export promotion zone, you must create a small system. The science funding requires autonomy. It does not require some 12 signatures for every 5,000 rupee sanction. It turns out that say DST releases something like 18,000 sanctions, and every sanction requires 12 signatures. And therefore, this question of they said Act of Parliament have a set different sets of rules. And there is this question of rejuvenation of research in the university system. At a time when I was a student, I grew up in AC College campus when GNR was at its very best. It turns out 12 Bhatnagar Prize winners of the 70 from Tamil Nadu came from AC Tech. It was a great system. Now, that university system used to have a big share of contributions to science. When I went to Delhi, 15% of contributions came from the university system. How do we rejuvenate the university system? National labs are great, but universities have the students. Therefore, the nucleus has to be, the spring of research has to be university system. Then this question of talent attraction. How do you bring talent to come to basic science? Pave a career path, give an attraction in this process, and address a talent supply chain. Then there's a question of globalization of R&D, where it brought reciprocity, parity principle. Dr. Chimbaram talked about how the fatigue, somebody talked about fatigue of donors. We said, we don't want your money, we will invest equal, but we'll share commitments equally. There is this question of popularization of science, gender parity in science, social contract of S&T, technology not as a product but as solutions, convergent solutions, and then the science to startups. These are all the 10 agendas were taken. They were converted to 74 new schemes during my time as Secretary, Department of Science and Technology. All are implemented. Inspire is one of them. Now, after 2015, okay, these are 515, what is the Science and Technology Innovation Policy of 2013, talked about democratization principle. The way we developed it, we wrote the script, and then I had 7 institutions organized meetings in different places. So 5,000 people participated, and then we drafted this, and I had Ramachandran write it in a language which people can understand, put it on the web, and they had available for people for 21 days, and then it was followed up. And the formation of a server funding and promotion of research purse, Inspire, and several schemes that happened, I talked to you before. Now, that has been continued also in 15 to 21. The same principles are retained. The process adopted for formulation of SCAP 2020 is bottom-up, not a top-down model. And you're talking about establishing a foundation with process simplification. That's a National Research Foundation is a concept with process simplification. And you're looking at establishment of RUSA on mission mode for the university system. Several schemes focus on individual fellowship opportunities. And this question of popularization of science, the Indian Science Festival and the India Science Channel, gender parity in science, women empowerment in various schemes, including this Kiran, and this question of social contract, the linking STIP as a social contract metaphor is built into our processes, and technology mission mode programs, and of course today Atal Innovation Centers is a part of this process. Therefore, what it conveys to you, it's not just one government, intergovernmentally, how things sustained in science in this over a period of time. And this question is, what have we done initiatives and what kind of evidence that is something is happening? So basically, I will talk about 8 processes: increase gross enrollment ratios in higher education, and increase in full-time equivalent scientists in the R&D sector, and number of authors in ISI scale publications. University research, R&D innovation, rejuvenation of university research, number of publications in peer-reviewed journals, number of essential science index, the highly cited papers from this country, and through a globalization of R&D in terms of databases, and improving competitiveness, patenting activities, and startup ecosystems. And I will present to you data, because I am one of those guys who believes in evidence-based decision making, because I don't believe in subjectivity. That's what I have learned in life. Therefore, I will present to you the trends that happen here. This is the enrollment ratio of students in higher education in this country. And don't look at the numbers, but look at the trends. It turned out when I was trying to set up this Inspire scheme, I asked for data on the number of children who passed school final in this country in 2005, in class 10, 2007 in class 12. It turned out 35 lakhs. And it so happened, I asked them, how many of these children were top 1% in the class 10 in 2005 and class 12 in 2007, 20,500. Then I asked the question, how many of them were small towns? 62%. How many of them are girls? 52%. I came back and said, Inspire will not have competitive examination. We will take this indications processes. And it turns out, at that time, 8% went to college. 8% went to college of 35 lakhs. Today, 1.7 crore is the number of children who pass the school final, and 26% is the people who go to college. And that's the number of students who go. This is the gross enrollment ratio in terms of percentages, from 8 to 25%. And it turns out that NEP 2020 says that India will have 20, 35, 20, 50%, Tamil Nadu 52% already. Now, in terms of increase in FTEs in number of publications about the super millennium. You're looking at number of LTEs in terms of R&D growth, in terms of the per million numbers. And this is the number of authors, number of papers, and number of authors growth process. There have been a 6-fold increase in the number of people publishing papers in Web of Science, science citation based in the journals in the last 20 years. And that's the number game that expansion took place. It turned out that when I used to be in the government, people used to accuse me of diluting the quality, but I said this, India needs the volume base for which any excitements can happen. Then there is this rejuvenation of research universities. These are the Web of Science papers, the top 28 universities in this country. You can see the change that happened, slope change. More number is unimportant. The direction of change is more important. And you're looking at this in terms of the citation, the H indices of the universities. It turns out when I had this PERS scheme, it was again a democratization process. We came back and said in 2008, I asked them to continue to find out 50% of publications came from how many institutions in this country? 35. How many of them are universities? 14. I said, these 14 universities, in spite of all the limitations they had, been part of the top 50%. Then we said, if anybody had, how many research IITs had H index above 50? 1. If three universities had H index above 50, we came back and invited them a grant, gave a research incentive grant of PERS of 30 crores for 3 years. And they can spend the way they want other than anything in a building. I gave them the autonomy. Then it is 40 to 49, they got 15 crores. 30 to 39, they got 9 crores. 25 to 29, they got 6 crores. And that same system is a 10-year aggregated data, 1996 to 2006. Then we came back and shifted by 2 years. 98, 2008, the 14 had become 44. And it turns out today there are 3 universities H index above 200. About 200. Okay, and there are 23 universities between 100 to 199, and 35 above 50, and every one of those 44 universities funded under PERS had gone into the 100 mode. So that is a rejuvenation process. Now, in terms of rise in public scientific public in the millennium, you're looking at in terms of 2 databases, the Web of Science and Scopus databases. You can look at the manners in which the slopes grow. It is a hockey stick change. So changing dynamics tell you there's something positive happen and there is no disruption in terms of slopes and changes and so on. Governments come, governments go, but there's eventually science do the scientists. Government doesn't do science, equipment doesn't do science, scientists do the science. So all that was necessary in this country to provide a little enabling role in terms of resource and support, and that is what is happening. And today, when I went to Delhi, we were 15th rank in position. And it turns out, in terms of Scopus database, we are 3 today. 3rd in Scopus database. And in terms of Web of Science, we are 6, but that 3, 4, 5, 6 are all clubbed. So it's a very small change. And it turns out the number of highly cited papers from India in 2004 was 0. And we looked at the manners in which we said, if you want to play the game of citation, you must speak the language of the Western world. Because they are the guys who do all the dominating Western. But science is today, whatever you may say, it's dominated by Europe and the US in terms of number game. So we said globalization process happened, and in terms of we made interactions possible, and it turns out that this is the lower curve. This is India. Do you realize that in 2021, India is 3rd largest in terms of highly cited papers after China and United States? All these nice collaborations, that CERN collaborations, all that bring you citations. And that's a process of globalization. India cannot, that's why it did not use the word Indian science. Talk about science in India. And these are relative comparisons in publication activity. There's a comparisons being done. You can see in Scopus how we have moved up. I have left out United States and China because the scales are very different. So I have come, you can see the India has moved up in the scale from here to here. And you look at this is Web of Science, all those countries which France, Canada, Italy, Japan. So many of them we are in the group listed, and it so happens that we will become third. It's a question of time because the growth rates are very high. And in terms of patenting activities, these are the kind of changes that happen in terms of patent for work done in this country, but the patent of people for value work and filing in this country, all that process happens. So the 2004 share of Indians filing patents in India has registered continuous increase. And that's a 2014 based system. And that's a startup ecosystem, which is really a really important part of the development process, because the science is great, publications is great, but you have to convert that also into some sense of an economic activity for the nation as a whole. And that's a startup process. And it turns out today we have become the third largest startup ecosystem in the world with the year-to-year growth of 15%. And we have, in fact, as of 2022, we might have moved to the second, moved up there as well. And the total value of the equities, and it turns out the number of women entrepreneurs stood at 14 and a couple of years ago. And it turns out that Bangalore is listed in the top 20 leading startup cities in the world level. Now, how do we do that in terms of science? I come to mathematics, math science, and don't talk about mathematics. Balu will be very unhappy with me. And I had to be living with Balu all his life, so I have to be careful. So it turns out that I take this 2017-21 and 97-2001, 20-year difference. Because to me, that's a time window with which changes can be observed. You can't see it year to year. You have to look at time window. And I also don't talk about a year, I take a duration. 5-year duration. And when you're looking at it in terms of the chemistry, 97 to 2001 to 2017-21, this is the Web of Science database. There's a 241% increase. And physics, 184%, biology, 175%. Suddenly, because of math, scientists in bold, it's 287%. And that's a fairly big change. Of course, I will say, Balu, look, you follow the publishing less during 97-2001. Your base was low. And engineering has really remarkably changed, and so has material science. In computer science, it turned out in 2003, the total number of people who finished PhD in this country, as India, was 33. Whole country is 33. Today, we have become third largest in terms of computer science of outputs in terms of publication base in the world. Now, we're looking at it in terms of rank movement. I talk about the chemistry, we were 10th during the 97-2001. Today, we are third. This is Web of Science. This is 11th to 4th, and biology 20th to 9th, mathematics for 13th to 5th, engineering 12th to 3rd, and material science to 3rd. Fundamentally, without getting into the details, we moved from a double-digit rank to a single digit across the various spectra of various disciplines in the process. Of course, these are data from Wikipedia, so I have no authenticity for this process. I will disown the responsibility for the data. This is Wikipedia, they backed up yesterday, and therefore you are very welcome to go and check this Wikipedia data. And I have reservations about something myself, but that I will not share. This is the purchase power parity investment of different countries as claimed by Wikipedia. Okay? And it turns out that India has been grouped as the 4th largest investor. And 3 years ago, we were the 6th largest investor. Okay? Therefore, we are somewhere between 6th and 4th. And this data tells you the kind of gross expenditure on research and development on purchase power parity terms. And what I have done here is to plot the gross enrollment investment of various countries as a percentage of the GDP against the number of full-time equivalent scientists per million population. These are not my creation. This is the way R&D intensity of nations are done, compared worldwide. And that's the process in which it is done. R&D intensity is measured in terms of full-time equivalent scientists per million population, and then percentage of the total expenditure of R&D as a percent of the GDP. The golden benchmark is 2% of the gross GDP and 4,000 scientists per million population. That's a number. And when I was in the government, I used to write and gave it to Prime Minister, we'll invest 2%, knowing fully well we cannot. Okay? I tell you why. If you want to invest 2% and above, the number of full-time scientists, full-time equivalent scientists, had to be more than 1,200 minimum per million population. Otherwise, you will invest, and as Dr. Chidambaram used to say, they'll suffer from indigestion problem. You'll invest, but they'll know how to digest. You need people to do this process. And it turns out that India's investment was here, moved up this particular point. So this is Asia. Korea, China, India. And for the first time, you recognize that Asia is moving into the science space away from Europe. Because it turns out these are the countries which I will call them as low resource setting countries. This is full-time equivalent scientist rich, FTE intensive countries. This is resource GRD investment countries. These are highly resource intense countries. It turns out these countries which are in this domain invest heavily, and the research results come out of that huge investments have to be paid for. You need to give a return from this process. It turns out these countries which are investing significantly, including the United States, do not have the capacity to serve the R&D needs, innovation needs of the countries in this quarter, because they're too expensive, unaffordable in the process. It turns out India is the only LMIC. There are 55 low-income group countries, 55 low-middle-income group countries. There are 90 countries. India's investment today is 93% of the 90 countries. And if the 90 countries require R&D, we are the best position to be able to provide that solution. And it turns out that Indian investments are 94% of total investments of 35 low income and 55 low income countries. And our investments here have a certain value to the world at large. It turns out the total investment into R&D as of the post-COVID scenario is $2.1 trillion. And if you invested at the same level as here, or the United States, the total investments of the world to serve the population of 7.5 billion will be $9.9 trillion, not 2.1. So the 2.1 at the level of investment of the United States can serve only 35% population, global population. Therefore, if we really require the 66% of the global population being bypassed with that high resource intensity model. Therefore, we have an opportunity to change things around. And I would say, change the Indian science sector, the new millennium profile, and credible arguments were advanced that early initiatives have found the foundation principles. At the turn of the millennium, successive governments have focused on building a viable superstructure for Indian higher education and R&D system. And evidence for accelerated development has been presented. All are verifiable data, public domain data. I have not cooked up anything. These are from Scopus database or Web of Science database. All are known. You can go back and check them up. And although the position of India in the global R&D has improved in volume space, she still remains a fringe player. And therefore, more is needed from Indian researchers for the nation gaining her rightful place. And I believe math science could show the way. And it turns out that Tagore, very interesting man, it talks about the tendency of modern civilization is to make the world uniform. Let the mind be universal, let the individual should not be destroyed. And I believe in the gross amplifications of the macroscopic space, let institutions like IMSC retain your individuality. Don't get burdened down by the averages of the lot. So all modern civilizations have the cradles of brick and mortar. In India, it was the forest that our civilization had its birth, and it took a distinctive character from this origin and environment. This is from Tagore. Okay? And education, it so happens that the ancient Indian civilization talked about education. Purpose of education is to reveal an internal perfection, self-realization. That's what the purpose of education is all about. Theory of anomy will say that man is born lawless. That's the Western world. Man, education makes him law-abiding. It turns out Britishers made us law-abiding. Let us look at Indian science in India, which is liberated from the natural processes. IMSC has tried to retain its individual in research and higher education. I think small is beautiful. Nimble structure provides a mobility and autonomy. Long live the IMSC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your perspectives and also for this very positive. I'd like to present you a small memento as a token of thanks.